The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Oh, happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Europe. I'm Steve Sedgwick with Ben Boulos, and Ritika Gupta will join us in Downing Street. These are your headlines. Andy Burnham set to pick up the key. I don't know if they are keys, but anyway, metaphorically pick up the keys to number 10 Downing Street today, becoming the UK's 5th Prime Minister in 4 years, as attention turns to his new neighbour, his pick for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Well, Brent crude topping $90 per barrel, up 2.9% in session as the US strikes Iran for a 9th consecutive night. Whereas the Central Command in the US confirming the deaths of 3 US troops over the weekend.
Ryanair posts a first quarter profit miss, down more than a third on the year as revenue per passenger falls and jet fuel prices spike, and warns that prices are trending lower in the current quarter. On a programming note, you can catch the CFO of Ryanair on CNBC today. That's at 11:35 London time.
All change, or is it? Is the UK finally going to get a Prime Minister who is going to be able to deliver economic growth and calm the markets and give cheaper gilts for those issuing them, i.e. the government as well? Well, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. We've got an expert on the show who's going to talk to us about it in a moment. He doesn't really know either, but he's going to give us a good guess anyway. The UK is poised to elect its 5th Prime Minister in 4 years. 5 Prime Ministers in 4 years. In a few hours' time, Andy Burnham will take over from Keir Starmer, the 11th PM of the 19 since the end of the Second World War. I thought you were going to say of the 19 since Brexit. Anyway, come to power without a general election. He takes the reins of a country with anemic growth, public sector debt at its highest level since the 1960s, and a skittish bond market. Oh, sounds so great, doesn't it? With investors and politicians alike eyeing the possibility of another Liz Truss moment. Let's hope not. If you don't remember what happened to Liz Truss, she got her longevity was beaten by a lettuce. Now attention turns to Burnham's plan for government, with cabinet appointments expected throughout the afternoon and the all-important Chancellor pick still in play. Well, Ritika is at the epicentre of what will be affirmative decision-making. Ritika, good morning to you. What are we expecting?
Good morning, Steve. Yeah, well, as you've mentioned here, Andy Burnham is going to officially be sworn in now as the 59th Prime Minister of the UK, the 5th in just 4 years. He's already led the Labour Party since Friday. In terms of the sequence of events, what we can expect is that Keir Starmer will be giving a goodbye speech here at Downing Street. He will then head over to meet with the King to officially resign. Then it'll be Andy Burnham's turn to go to the palace, where the King will ask him to form a government, and then he will shortly afterwards come here to Downing Street, where he will give a welcome speech and then be disappearing into those black doors behind me. But once the ceremonial stuff is out of the way, that's, Steve, when we get the biggest challenge. Will he be able to make the changes that his predecessor could not? Because he's certainly going to inherit some of the same problems. And much of that, of course, will depend on his cabinet. And that's going to be announced today. And all eyes are on who he's going to choose as the Chancellor, with Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, tipped off to get that role. Now, we know some of Burnham's big picture ideas, right? So he wants to make a return to the Labour Party that is distinctly Labour, meaning a return to those kind of social democratic roots and those core values. So that includes policies like more public control over utilities, reindustrialisation, and returning more power to communities through devolution. But the issue here is that we don't have many details on how he's going to do this, particularly how he's going to fund all of this. And there is this big difference between idealism, but how that actually translates into the economy and the tough choices that any Prime Minister has to make. So far, we haven't seen a big adverse reaction in the markets, and a big reason why is because Andy Burnham has pledged to stick to the UK's fiscal rules. But the risk remains that over time, this new government, if they want to start spending and borrowing more aggressively, aggressively, that could then shake up the markets once again, because again it returns to this idea that yes, it's all fine and well having idealism, but how do you fund that? Will Andy Burnham have the ability to put his money where his mouth is? We don't have, again, many details on it, so it's hard to tell just yet.
Richard, I suppose the politics will be pulling him in one direction to try and spend and invest and boost growth. On the other hand, that warning from the IMF will be ringing in his ears, the fact that 10-year gilts at around 5% keep borrowing costs high. The economics suggests that actually he really can't afford to go splurging and spending in the way that politically he may want to do to avoid that negative perception of Keir Starmer towards the end, as the opinion polls had him as very unpopular.
Yes, indeed, Ben. I mean, this is the issue. We have seen gilt yields. They are significantly higher to where they were this time a year ago. But of course, a big part of that is due to those higher oil prices from the Middle East. And that's going to be a big constraint on the UK's economy as well going forward. And the big issue is, yes, how is he going to fund all of these big policy ideas? Because he has recommitted to the manifesto pledge that he won't be able to raise income tax, VAT, national insurance contributions. So it's likely that there's going to be more of a series of kind of wealth taxes, so the likes of, I guess, changing council taxes for homes, so higher council tax on more expensive homes, changing land taxes, capital gains taxes. But the issue with this is that there is a limited effect at some point. There's that idea of the Laffer curve, that at some point it doesn't become effective, and so he may run up into similar challenges that his predecessor had.
OK, Ritika, thank you very much indeed for that report. And, of course, you are standing outside number 11, number 10 to the right there as well. OK, great. Thank you very much indeed for that. Next guest says what he calls the political merry-go-round of prime ministers isn't a good look and means businesses and investors have to operate against the backdrop of constant uncertainty. Mike Bell, head of market strategy at RBC Blue Bay Asset Management, joins us. Good to see you, Mike, as well. What can Andy Burnham do that the previous 5 prime ministers since Brexit haven't done?
Well, it's a great question. I think it ultimately comes right to the heart of it, that he's not been put in place to just continue with things as they were. And yet the problem is that the bond markets are going to be watching like hawks to see whether he actually delivers any kind of net fiscal easing. You know, to boost growth, you need to deliver net fiscal easing, not just shuffle wealth around the country. But with debt to GDP at 100%, the bond markets don't want to see that fiscal easing come through. So that's the key challenge that he faces, that ultimately a lot of his backers want something that the bond markets don't want.
His backers are economically illiterate, aren't they? I don't mean to be, well, I don't mean to be rude, but that's very rude. But a lot of the backbench MPs got rid of Starmer, don't like Rachel Reeves, because they're not delivering more social care, more pensions, more levelling up for other parts of the country. And I don't particularly think they did a particularly good job, but I think that they're asking for something that can't be delivered without a problem fiscally or without having more of a burden on those already paying taxes.
I think it's fair to say that when debt to GDP is at 100%, it's a lot harder to be a politician than it was when debt levels are lower. And the fundamental problem facing the UK, and indeed many other developed market economies, is that as the population ages, we're on this unsustainable debt trajectory. If you think state pension spending is currently about 5% of GDP, it's forecast to rise to 9% by 2075 as the population ages.
Sorry, obvious thing then, get rid of the triple lock, get rid of this measure that takes up the cost of pensions or the inflation rate of pensions by one of 3 measures. Take it out straight away and we'll save ourselves billions and billions. Why won't they do something sensible like that?
Well, I think the very obvious answer to that is because the share of the voters who are pensioners is also rising as we age. So again, you've got this fundamental tension in that what the voters want is not what an economic advisor would tell you to do. Same with the NHS, right? The NHS is currently about 8% of GDP in terms of spending. It's forecast to rise to 13% by 2075. But what an economic advisor would tell you to do is the complete opposite of what a political advisor would tell you to do. And that's why we keep getting new prime ministers every year.
Mike, a lot of talk about the possibility of Shabana Mahmood moving from the Home Office to the Treasury as Chancellor. What's your take on that? How much do we know about what her position would be as Chancellor?
Yeah, not a lot, I think. She obviously doesn't have a kind of background in fiscal policy or economics. So I think, markets initially...
For all our international viewers who are watching here aghast, and the British... we've just appointed the most important financial executive in the country. You've delegated, you're the CEO, you're Burnham the CEO, you've just made your CFO someone who's got no background in economics. Did you just say that?
I think, one could make an argument that it would make sense to have people with more of an economic background at the Chancellor.
She hasn't been confirmed yet, has she? It's still rumours at this stage, yeah.
No. But, I think initially, right, markets are going to be happy that it's not Miliband if Mahmood is appointed. But as soon as we shift from kind of focusing on the people to the policies, the markets are going to put Mahmood under the microscope. Yeah. And, ultimately that's when all of these challenges that we talked about, ageing, going to have to spend more on defence, how is that all going to be funded? And the problem, of course, with wealth taxes is that they affect asset values. And also you've got the tax take is the highest it's been as a percentage of GDP at any point since 1940. The top 1% pay almost 30% of tax, and the top 10% pay 60% of tax. So we're already taxed pretty heavily.
But I suppose that, when the IMF is warning not to break away from the previous Chancellor and Prime Minister's rules, to maintain discipline when it comes to public spending, this idea that they could sort of go on spending a splurge or find more money to invest or massage the rules to be able to borrow more, it would potentially then jeopardise the situation with the cost of borrowing and push yields higher.
Which is, of course, the problem that we've seen play out before. You're in this situation where when debt to GDP ratios are high, if you don't convince international investors and the bond markets more broadly that you've got a fiscal plan that means that everything's sustainable, then the borrowing costs rise. And already, if you think about some of the people who are going to be affected by potential tax rises, they're already seeing their mortgage costs increase. I personally am on a 1.2% mortgage rate that refinances. Well, refinances in August
at showing off as well
at a lot higher level. Do you know what I mean? So it's going to squeeze people to the mortgage costs.
Can I just jump in here? I'm already sick of the gloom and doom. To be fair, that's what Starmer did first speech he made. He made us all feel miserable. Donald Trump says we can do this. In fact, Leonie Kidd, who's the head of news, she's written this morning in the Daily Open. The United... this is Trump. I won't do a Trump voice. I want to, but I won't. Trump has written on Truth Social welcoming Burnham to open up the North Sea, saying it will take the UK from a poverty-stricken disaster to one of the richest countries anywhere in the world. Yay! That's great. We are. I didn't know we were a poverty-stricken disaster, but maybe we are. And we're going to be one of the richest countries in the world. Yeah, it's going to happen.
So I think there are lots of challenges facing the
President says
government.
It's going to happen.
And look, on energy policy, I think ultimately there are changes required. We need to have both energy independence, and I think near term, North Sea should be part of that. But we also need to be investing more in renewables to allow us to have long-term energy independence and lower energy costs, which has been a major problem. I listened to the speech on Friday, and you would have thought that the cost of living crisis had nothing to do with Putin and the war in Iran. We live in a more dangerous world, and we need energy independence.
Mike, remember in your first answer you said the bond market's going to be watching like a hawk, especially the first few days of Andy Burnham in power. I wonder what they make of the headline in the FT. Plans beefed up control centre in Downing Street to be less reliant on an imperial treasury. Does that suggest the markets will find favour with that, in that he wants to be more robust with his spending plans and decisive, or do you think they will see it as an attempt to try and break free of what some may see as sensible constraints and the brakes being put on?
I think ultimately, the market looks at the numbers. You can talk a lot about the politics and wrap it up in nice words, But as investors, we're very focused on the numbers. And so the policy is going to matter. Whether that comes predominantly from the Treasury or from number 10 is less important. Ultimately, what matters is, do you see an improvement in growth, and do you see fiscal slippage? In other words, are you spending even more than you're taking in taxes? And the problem is that, okay, you can raise taxes, but given we're already taxed a lot, putting taxes up weighs on growth. As we've seen, they put up the national insurance contributions. It's led to job cuts in retail and hospitality. So we've got to find a way of delivering growth. And the challenge is that higher taxes are weighing
insurance, because if they'd done it, that would have been a stealth tax, which actually was breaking the manifesto in all but words. So they couldn't have done that. They couldn't have done that in the last 2 years. Don't do stupid stuff, dear Mr. Burnham. That's Martin Wolf this morning as well, and it sounds like really good advice. Of course, it's Martin Wolf and the FT quoting Barack Obama. Don't do stupid stuff. What is the stupidest thing they could do?
I mean, that's a long list, but
it's put up taxes, isn't it? Too much? Stifle the growth?
I think you've got
or spend too much money, do something trust-like. I don't know. What is it, Mike?
Debt is measured relative to GDP. Okay, so anything that slows GDP down, as putting taxes up does, is not a great idea, right? You can't be in a kind of doom loop where you put taxes up, the economy slows, you put taxes up more. That clearly doesn't work. We've seen that under previous governments. Yeah. But there's no easy answers here, right? I think part of it, what you could do, is have more coordination between fiscal and monetary policy. So putting taxes up, or indeed I would suggest cutting spending, weakens the economy and is disinflationary. If you cut interest rates, it's inflationary and boosts the economy. So what you could do is cut interest rates at the same time as cutting spending, and they'd offset each other.
Yeah. Oh, you have to get the independent Bank of England to do the right thing. Or be less independent. Mike, thank you very much indeed for that. Mike will always be known from now on as Mike 1.2% Bell. Head of... no.
Not for long.
Not for long, no, not for long. Mike 5% Bell. Right, okay. Mike Bell, Head of Market Strategy. Thanks, Mike. That's really good. Head of Market Strategy at RBC Blue Bay Asset Management. And I mentioned what Mr. Trump said. President Trump has hailed Burnham's supposed approach to open up North Sea oil, saying it will take the United Kingdom from a poverty-stricken disaster to, that was a terrible impression, to one of the richest countries anywhere in the world. For more, check out the CNBC Daily Open online.
Still to come on the show, Brent hits $90 a barrel as the US strikes Iran for the 9th night in a row. We'll be live in Abu Dhabi next. Plus, heat waves and droughts have sent water levels in Germany's Rhine River to multi-year lows and potentially now hitting the economy. And we'll speak to the CEOs of Boeing and Airbus with defence in focus at the Farnborough International Air Show. All of that coming up.
Executive Decisions is the new podcast from CNBC, where I ask powerful leaders about their decisions that changed everything. I'm Steve Sedgwick. Here's the CEO of the London Stock Exchange Group, Julia Hoggett.
There is no justification whatsoever for not doing the right thing, even if the right thing is hard to do. Which also means that if the context changes or the information changes, it is absolutely fine to also change your mind.
That's Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. Get it wherever you're listening to this.
Welcome back. Let's check in on how the markets are doing. And a brief reminder of how the US markets on Wall Street closed the Friday session, all of them in negative territory, as indeed they were for the week. It was the Nasdaq that was the biggest faller for the week last week, down almost 3%. The others also giving up territory. We saw that wobble around the AI trade, sell-off in semiconductor stocks, really hitting tech equities there. Let's Turn our attention to what's currently happening in the Asia session, and that same sentiment filtering through to the Asian markets as well. Look at that, the Kospi extending the losses we saw last week. It was off by almost 9% thereabouts last week, giving up a further 4% today. It is the Hang Seng and the Shanghai Composite that are providing the green on the board so far. It's the Hang Seng leading the way, up almost 2%. But we are still seeing the effects of the renewed fighting between the US and Iran affecting the oil price. Steve will have more on that in a moment, but that clearly weighing on equities as well. Brief glance at European futures, again after a Friday session in which most of the benchmarks closed negative, looking to extend those losses, including on the blue chip Pan-European stocks 50 and the other key benchmarks, the FTSE and the DAX, also looking to open in negative territory as we count down to the European market open in under 40 minutes from now, Steve.
Well, the market is gradually eroding all of those declines we saw from the détente in strikes between Iran, Israel and the United States. And the oil market now continuing to rally, with Brent crude now up 3.3%, trading at $91 a barrel, having risen 15% last week. The US has launched strikes on Iran for a 9th consecutive day. The US Central Command said the latest attacks aimed at weakening Iran's ability to attack commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, hitting targets in several Iranian cities. Meanwhile, the US military confirmed that 3 service members died in hostilities this weekend. Dan joins us with more. Dan, are we back to full-blown conflict now, or is this an interim measure? I mean, I just kind of want to know where we are, because obviously the market has taken oil price back up to $91 a barrel, but nowhere near the heights we saw at the peak of the crisis.
Right, Steve, good morning. Well, the ceasefire is effectively dead. The MOU is in tatters, and it would appear that the president may now be forced to escalate this conflict. It's been a deadly weekend for American forces in the region, and that has raised the prospect of a stronger US retaliation. That is also why we're seeing Brent push back above $90 a barrel now. The market is basically pricing in the greater risk of a wider escalation and a further disruption to oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. What we saw at the weekend was an Iranian missile strike on an airbase in Jordan that killed 2 US service members. It left another missing and wounded several others. Unidentified remains found at the base are also now being examined, according to CENTCOM. And then separately, an American service member was also killed in northern Iraq during the controlled detonation of a downed Iranian drone. And that brings the confirmed US death toll from the weekend to 3, and the total in this conflict to at least 17. Just hours ago, Central Command completing what was a 9th consecutive night of strikes against Iran, targeting command centers, air defenses, coastal surveillance, maritime capabilities, and missile and drone sites, according to a statement. And according to the Wall Street Journal this morning, Washington is also now sending more F-16s, more F-35s, and more refueling aircraft to the region, certainly raising the possibility of a larger campaign, or at least more options for the president to use. So the fear now is that the American deaths raise the odds of a bigger US response, and anything that threatens the flow of oil through Hormuz, which remains effectively closed despite those US efforts to get ships moving again. Some analysts that I've spoken to today, including Amrita Sen at Energy Aspects, weighing in on Access Middle East this morning, warning that a sustained disruption here could push oil back towards $100 and beyond. And of course, for consumers or anyone exposed to the market, that means higher prices at the pump and of course a fresh inflation headache, just as central banks throughout the course of this war thought the energy shock was starting to fade. So we're already seeing this filtering into not just the crude complex here, but likely filtering into the equity trade and of course the inflation translation in the months to come as well, if we do see sustainably higher oil prices from here. So we're really watching and waiting to see exactly what options the president chooses to take next.
Indeed. And Dan, I suppose those inflationary pressures will be in mind as traders price in the potential effects of that on the president's decisions, with the midterms approaching in a matter of months. But of course, the blockade on Iran's ports is going to start impacting the Iranian economy as well, even more. And I suppose the hope is, among traders, it must be that those pressures on both sides will eventually force them back to the negotiating table, which seems at the moment out of reach.
That's exactly right, Ben. And the Iranian economy is hurting here. Of course, the US blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is effectively restricting their own ships from getting in and out of that vital waterway. It means that Iran's oil export revenues have effectively dried up and been cut off. That's all part of the US campaign here to target Iran economically, not just militarily. And then on the other side as well, of course, higher oil prices are also a headache for this president as he comes into the midterm elections later this year. Also for his ally in Israel, where we're also going to see Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu going to the polls in October. So the political calculus here is an important one as the president weighs his next steps. In terms of what the US might actually do here, well, the president, of course, has plenty of options on the table. This last week, we saw the US working to strike significant sites along the Strait of Hormuz and inside Iran. The president now also threatening to strike Iranian bridges and perhaps even energy assets over this week as well, if we don't see some kind of progress towards a diplomatic off-ramp. So that's the situation as it stands this morning. And of course, markets attempting to price exactly what the president might do next.
OK, Dan, thank you very much for the update. Dan Murphy there for us. Thousands of Ukrainians have protested against the sudden dismissal of the country's defence minister, Mikhailo Fedorov. It comes amid a government reshuffle, which included the appointment of a new prime minister, as well as several members of the cabinet. Fedorov has previously clashed with the more conventional Ukrainian military chief of staff. President Zelensky has defended his decision to not reappoint Fedorov, saying he was, quote, forced to choose between sides when he was aiming for unity. Russia has launched one of its largest ballistic missile attacks on Kyiv, while Ukrainian drones have carried out their deadliest strikes inside Russia in more than 2 years as the war grinds on. For all the details, check out the write-up at cnbc.com.